Welcome to On the Table with Ashley. This is episode 4 of our wellness series, where we take a deep dive into the true meaning of wellness, cutting through the noise of quick fixes and fleeting health trends to uncover what wellness truly looks like. Each episode, you'll hear from experts across different fields as they share how they approach health, from physical and mental health to holistic and alternative practices, to give you real, lasting ways to care for your mind, body, and spirit. Today, our guest is Dr. Rinat Tal. Dr. Tal is a psychiatrist specializing in psychiatric and mental health care for adults. Her connection to mental health began in childhood, shaped by her ancestors' experiences as Holocaust survivors. Growing up in this environment fueled her desire to understand both herself and those around her on a deeper level. Dr. Tal began her academic journey with a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of California, Berkeley, and earned a medical degree from Tel Aviv University, followed by completing her psychiatric residency and fellowship at UCLA. Dr. Tal's work combines medical practices with a holistic perspective, considering the mind, body, and emotions as interconnected elements of well-being. In addition to her practice, Dr. Tal teaches workshops at the Free Association Clinic for Existential Psychotherapy and Psychoanalysis, centered around the philosophical underpinnings of human emotions. Enjoy.
Dr. Rinat Tal, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to talk with you about your work and about the general subject of wellness and the specifics of how it relates to your area of expertise.
That sounds great. I find this topic to be especially important nowadays, where I think that there is confusion between healing and treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. I generally like to start my conversations hearing where you grew up and what you were like as a child.
I grew up in Israel. My parents moved here when I was a teenager, and that was incredibly challenging as your body's starting to change. Everything is kind of being snatched away and you're being placed in this new culture. In Israel, my 4 grandparents were Holocaust survivors. I think I grew up in a family that felt unsafe. There was a feeling of unsafety. Something bad may happen at any moment. I grew up with that, and I think that led to me feeling also unsafe. That unsafety came with me to the US.
Before we get to your grandparents, can you just tell us a little bit about what you were like as a child? What did you like to do? Were you curious? Were you outdoors? What were some of your favorite memories?
So I'll tell you, as a child, I remember that my room was my kingdom. And in that room, there was lots of imagination going on. I was creating worlds. And when I had friends come over, I would create worlds with them. Those friends, by the way, are still very cherished friends of mine up to today. And we talk about how we used to create these worlds and mazes and letters. And so there was a lot of imagination, which in retrospect, I'm sure was a sanctuary for me, away from that unsafety that I just told you about. Lots of immersion into the arts. I remember taking a class in clay and sculpture and painting and drawing. And then so I loved touching the materials, right? And then simultaneously, I began to read the sort of mentors of the psyche, right? Freud and Jung and Melanie Klein. And I just couldn't get enough of learning what these people had to say about humans and the psyche. So I would say these 2 threads were there throughout for me.
So with your grandparents having survived the Holocaust, and all 4 of them survived?
Yes.
Which is amazing.
Yes. But they were sole survivors from big, huge families, right? I mean,
right.
Nobody else was.
Yeah. And the sense of not being safe, how often did your grandparents and your parents talk about the Holocaust with you? Was it like an ever-present sensation, or was it verbalized all of the time?
So my parents did not speak much about it, but they carried an energy of worry, I would say, or high anxiety states, both of them each in their own way, and they each had their own ways of coping with their anxiety state. But my grandparents, when I would visit, and they were very instrumental in my life. I loved going to my grandparents. It was like a way to run away to this other home. And on one hand, it was very warm and cozy. They'd always make food, and there's a lot of rituals around eating the food and being together. But there were always comments oh, you have food now, but you might not have it, you never know. All these kind of scary comments. So there was warmth and coziness intermixed with fear. I would say that was the feeling that I remember from childhood.
And we'll talk about this more later, but I also did a series on death and dying. I think it's like this last frontier we don't talk enough about.
Yes.
And a book was recommended to me. It's called The Smell of Dust on Rain or something like that. I'll have to look up exactly the title. But in it, the author talks about how trauma goes from generation to generation. And if it's not healed, it persists. So just hearing you, it sounds like your grandparents' trauma was passed on to your parents and it was not healed. And then it was passed on to you as a young child. I'd love to hear about your own healing journey, which maybe is why you ended up in the field. And then how you help your patients deal with sort of that intergenerational trauma and how often you see it.
Sure. So, I actually start a session very open. It's very open. And I tell the person I'm with, just start anywhere. Take me to wherever you want to go. And some people start in this present moment. Well, things are terrible at work and this and that. And some people go right back to childhood or something that happened a year ago. But that's the beginning of me becoming acquainted with the story. The person who is new to me and they're letting me into the narrative. And that's fascinating. And it's a huge privilege to be let into somebody else's story. And that story triggers questions in me. Oh, you're talking about your work. What happened and when you were a child? And what did what did mom and dad do for a living, right? What was work like? What was it? So one thing leads to the other. It's like this puzzle with little pieces, and you can see how the pieces sort of fall into place and where there is suffering in the context of that story. So what tends to happen right now is people are obviously suffering, both because of their own internal struggles and their search for meaning and the state of the external world. And very often when people go to get help, there's a tendency for psychiatrists to evaluate them and focus on what we call symptoms. Are you crying more often than usual? Do you find yourself unable to sleep at night? Do you isolate? Things like that. And it doesn't always get to the story of the person, the complexity and the multidimensionality of what really happens in this person's life. So therefore, if we cannot know who the person is, we only know their symptoms, I'm not sure how much healing we can offer, but we can certainly offer what's called treatment. And that, in my opinion, tends to be, it doesn't give the kind of fulfillment to many, many people who are now seeking answers elsewhere.
I have had a conversation with a wonderful woman named Autumn Bear, who's an acupuncturist and studied traditional Chinese medicine in New York for many, many years. And she recommended a book to me about acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And it's this sense of that you're talking about, this, like, who is the whole person coming in for whatever it is, whether it's a physical ailment or a mental ailment, if you want to call it an ailment. And I think that in Western medicine, we've gotten so focused on treating the symptoms that we're not healing the person. And,
Exactly.
and it sounds like your practice is very much focused on that. And I think as you said, in this time we're living in, and maybe it's always like this, honestly, it feels like heavier now, but I think throughout history, people have had to deal with very heavy things as well, that we need to get back to this sort of looking at the whole person. I think our Western medicinal system is less set up for that, with you have 10 minutes to see each patient. You have, it's the time limitation as well as the hyper focus on expertise. So I've also spoken with physicians who, nowadays when you're coming up in medicine, you hyper focus. So I focus on just this area of the shoulder or just the knee. And if you do that, there are benefits, but there are also drawbacks.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about how you found your way into this maybe sort of more holistic approach and what that looks like in your practice.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if my search for that holistic approach actually began when I was a little child, and I became very fascinated with the psyche and why people feel the way they feel. So that's how I became interested in the psyche. When I was in college, I thought of going towards psychology, and I ended up doing some research in a lab. Somehow the research felt a bit sterile to me, which is what led me to medicine. I wanted to get to know the human from birth to death and everything in between. And of course, when I was in medical school, again, the fascination with the psyche kept on being so urgent in my own being. Then I started to, of course, rotate and spend time in psychiatric wards. And I felt that here are these people who are actually at the highest degree of suffering, emotionally speaking. In fact, many of them used to say, oh, if I could just have a physical ailment right now, I'd prefer that than my emotional. And yet what was offered seemed so minimal. And sometimes I would say even unsafe as far as the healing, maybe not the treatment, but the healing piece. And so I started to seek something else. I didn't know what I was seeking, but I knew I had to look for something else. And then luckily for me, I paint and draw. I love the arts. And in my art class at the time, I met a psychiatrist who treated, and this will sound pretty controversial, but he used to treat schizophrenia without medications. And he and I spoke, and he said, oh, I think I know what you're looking for. And he wrote his phone number on a piece of paper. And that started a very incredible, priceless mentorship with this amazing man who I met once a week for about a decade. And he believed that there is healing, that the kind of reductionistic chemical approach is not the only thing that exists out there. And that's what started my search. On a day-to-day basis, I absolutely look at the medication piece. Many clients come to me, they're already on medicines. And some people are very desperate to get some sort of immediate relief for their unbearable suffering. But I still keep that other bigger perspective in mind of this is not about chemistry. This is much bigger than chemistry. Chemistry is a small piece of the puzzle, and that piece has to be handled very carefully. The reason I think it has to be handled very carefully is because medications can also be numbing. Right? So I often meet people who are in the midst of a transition or a transformation. It doesn't feel pleasant. It feels like they've reached an abyss. They've reached the lowest place in their life, but they're really in this growth spurt. So you don't want to eradicate that with a medicine, right? So often the choice is, are you in the middle of a transformation, a journey? And let's walk this journey together. I'll be there as a guide. And it's going to take time and patience and allowing pain to be a guide. We always hear about growing pains, and that happens on an emotional level as well.
So tell us about a patient comes in, a patient you haven't seen before. What does that first visit look like? I just finished a series on neuroaesthetics, which is basically how the brain reacts in the built environment. And my last conversation was with a woman who is a designer, but also is a therapist. And she actually says she has a treatment plan for your physical space, which I think is fascinating. So she talks about and studied a lot about how our childhood, good or bad, impacts like what we want in a space, what feels safe in a space. And I'm wondering if you do the same in your initial meeting with a patient.
I would say that I see it in almost every person that I encounter.
Wow.
Because people carry known trauma and unknown trauma. And it's through the stories when we start to kind of peel the layers, you realize, wait a second, there was this one thing. I met with a woman who had a car accident, very traumatized. Her parents offered to give her funds to get a new car. The fact that the parents offer that, and she telling me this story, and her shame around taking the money from the parents led to this entire world of how money was treated, poverty in previous generations, what the parents took from it, how they passed on to her the experience of deprivation and lack as a way of being alive. And all of a sudden they're offering money for a car and she didn't know what to do with it, right? But she had no idea that there was trauma around money in this case, but it's really an energy state, right? So I think we just pass trauma as humans because life is suffering. The Buddhists talk about it. And we unknowingly embody the suffering. And if we don't process it, we pass it on, right? So I think awareness is so healing. Imagine if you can talk about deprivation and abundance and one's relationship to having and not having, how much healing happens just in that alone.
One of the things that I like, the whole reason I want to do this podcast is to talk about things people generally don't talk about, because I feel like in that silence, all these stories occur that may or may not be true stories, and that we tend to try to avoid the hard things, but it's actually when we confront the hard things that we can find more peace. And, so like death and dying as a subject is extremely difficult. People don't want to talk about it. But when you talk about it, when you think about it, when you plan for it, both for yourself and your loved ones, I mean, my personal experience is that you experience more peace. Not that there's not suffering and sadness and difficulty, but there's also an ability to see the bigger picture, to face what's coming or what's in front of you better. So in your own story, you had grandparents who had one of the biggest traumas that we know of today. Your parents carried that trauma and they passed it on to you. How did you, or do you, address that to a healing state?
So the healing is something I seek all the time. And because healing is so layered, it's an ongoing process. I actually see it as a lifelong process. I don't think one reaches or at least for me, I should just speak about myself. I don't think I reached a state where I thought, oh, I'm healed now. And from now moving forward, it's just like this fun ride. This is the fascinating thing about life, right? You think you're healed and then you encounter a new relationship with another human, another creative process, something else happens and you realize, well, I may have healed a little bit, but there's so much more to do. Yeah. And I love the therapeutic work. I would say that over the years, I've had so many incredible helpers, therapists, healers that were guides to me. And so I feel like I'm either guiding or I'm being guided on an ongoing basis. And that's what maybe we're here to do as humans for each other.
So healing is a process, not an end point.
Yes.
And yet I have to imagine that through all of the work that you've done with other therapists and guides, teachers, whatever you want to call them throughout your life, that you feel maybe less of a sense of unsafety than you did when you were a child?
Yes, absolutely. If there is, let's say, I think of like these polarities in life, the ground and the sky, right? The sky being inspiration and, you just go wherever you want in your imagination, in what you create. And then the ground is it's where you're rooted, where you feel like you have something solid to connect with, which is really internal, of course. And I feel like I needed much more groundedness in my own trauma led to a sort of, I would say, a vulnerability around my sense of groundedness. There was also, of course, the moving as being immigrants, which I'm sure so many immigrants experience all over the world. But this feeling that you don't really have a ground, that you are needing to carve out new ground. But my healing work has helped me with that tremendously.
So let's go back to your patients. So a patient comes in, it's very open-ended in your first session. do you have this discussion with them early on that healing is a process, a lifelong process? And how does one know when they need to keep coming to see you, or when they can move on to their next state of their journey in their lifelong healing process?
That's a great question. I would say that for that one, I use my intuition. There's some people come in and I can feel that they are so ready and wanting this sort of deeper excavation that we talk about it right away. But so often I also meet people who come in and they're like, Dr. Tal, I've been on this medicine for 20 years and then my doctor added this other medicine. I still don't feel well. I sort of hold off at bringing that up because I'm not sure that they're ready for it yet, and I assume that also when talking about death and dying, there is a timing of when that can be approached or discussed, right? But in my mind, I am always thinking, how do we work towards that? How do we get to that more maybe mysterious, actually, aspect of the work? Yeah.
So some of your patients, I assume you see for years and years and years, and some perhaps it's a shorter duration. And it depends on the patient, their readiness, and maybe also willingness.
Absolutely. And what it is that they are looking for, right? Some people come with very firm ideas of what they are looking for. And they might feel like, wow, Rinat can't really give this to us, right? They can't that's not what I'm looking for. I'm wanting to evaluate this medicine. But I don't always feel, as I said, that's where the healing is at.
And how often, so we started this conversation and, one of the very first things you said, and you also talk about it on your website, that this taking a holistic approach to mental health. This is what you say on the website, one that honors the intricate connection between the mind, body, and psyche. Presumably people have read that before they come to see you, but is it something that you reiterate in a first meeting and perhaps on a regular basis, that this is not just about the medicine you're taking, this is about healing, not just treatment, and that is a process that frankly will take a lifetime, and that do your patients need to buy into that to have success with you, or maybe success at all? And how do sometimes people come in and they just want the medicine and they don't want to sort of get to this deeper holistic sense of things?
Yeah.
When do you spend the most time with the people you love? For us, it's at home, around the dinner table with family, or sipping cocktails in the living room with friends. So why not make that time even more meaningful by imbuing your gatherings with pieces that not only make connecting easier, but spark conversation around your table? Amaton's collection of small batch, artisan, quality-made pieces for tabletop and home are not only made for simple serving, they're works of art designed for daily use. Whether you're hosting a dinner party or sitting down for family game night, our collections create a sense of presence and peace in every home. Shop our collection of dinnerware, drinkware, serveware, and more at amatond.com. That's AMEATENDRE.com. Gather by design.
Many times people come in and they want the medicine and they do not want to get to this deeper sense of things there. And that's another interesting, complicated aspect of the work, because we live in a world that's very fast-paced and everybody now seems to be in a hurry, right? So there is like a need for this immediate relief. And then there is, well, I don't have time to come for these meetings. And by the way, it's very real, right? Between work and kids and having to drive to visit sick parents or whatever it is, there is no time. So we've created this world that's very fast-paced and there's no time. And here we're talking about a very different process. You could almost say something that's almost polarized, that's about patience and slowing down and allowing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got back from a trip to Japan and visited many Buddhist and Shinto sites. And actually, we were really fortunate to meet with a monk and experienced like a meditation session. And we were able to ask him some questions after. I asked him what he liked the best about being a monk, and he said, nothing troubles him. And you could really sense that. And I think this is like a state of mind that many of us will never achieve. And I think all the work that I do in my life, and I have 2 children and husband and family, and the worry, and I really try to sort of let go and only control the things I can control. But the worry that you have for the people that you love in your life is so real that I feel like I can never get to that state that that monk has achieved. But I feel like it is a really wonderful objective because the truth is we can't control the things that we can't control.
True.
So it is better to not worry about them and accept what comes. But it's quite difficult to do when you have people in your life that you love.
That's true. And don't forget that monk is practicing. The monk is in the practice all day long.
Every day. And has the benefit of not having a lot of the daily, I don't even know what to call them, like life events that we are dealing with, right? In a way, he has a very simplified life, which he has chosen to enable this sort of state of enlightenment, which he said is in all of us. And I believe that. It's whether or not we can find it and access it. But I thought it was really interesting that the thing that he loves the most about being a monk is not feeling troubled by anything. So maybe you can talk with us a little bit about what collaboration in your work as a psychiatrist looks like, because you've said your patients come to you, they may be on medication, they have lots of life events that have been traumatic. They may be working with other kinds of guides and teachers, whether it's yoga or a nutritionist or any other kind of guide. So can you talk a little bit about how you collaborate and whether you collaborate with these other sort of guides and teachers in your patients' lives?
So, because my work is so focused on the relationship, and here is another interesting thing is where the hearsay out there is that we're about to relinquish the relationship and we'll all be meeting robots, right? If not for our driving, then for the person who brings food. And now they're saying that mental health will also be more robotic, right? But I'm such a believer in the value of the relationship. The relationship is where all the mystery happens. First of all, the collaboration is, one is no longer alone. So much of suffering comes from I'm alone in this pain, or I'm alone in feeling depression, and I can't let, you're talking about the beloved, I can't let my children know about it. There's a sort of instinct to hide pain and not talk about it, which then revalidates this I'm alone in the world, and I'm the only one who's going through this challenging, very painful experience. So when you open up to the relationship, you're no longer alone. So that's the collaboration, I would say. For me, it's the assets. Of course, there are, in various settings, other incredible people who come in, medical doctors, yoga teachers. Some of my clients have been pursuing plant medicine recently. And all of these other dimensions of care are so important. But the collaboration is not always direct. It's in the community that's being created.
And I have to imagine that the relationship is everything in your line of work. So is it the case sometimes that with a patient, you feel like you cannot access or create that relationship? And if that's the case, is the treatment just not going to work?
You bring an interesting point. I always say that the best treatment happens when I fall in love with the patient. And I know I know it's a loving relationship. It's not falling in love in the erotic sense per se, but just in this like excitement of having this continuity and meeting again and going back into the story and so forth. So yes, the relationship, and it's mysterious, and it's who knows why some relationships just take off and others don't, Yeah.
And when they don't, do you suggest to the patient that they find another psychiatrist, or how do you sort of navigate those waters?
I find it to be a much more organic process, because also we never know, right? I might think, we're not really doing much here or this and that, but I've learned from experience that my judgment is often not the sort of experience of the other side. And some people need a lot of time before they open up and are able to be vulnerable. I actually remember a story that my incredible mentor told me, that at one time he met with a man for a full year, and every time this patient showed up, he would talk about history, every time. And then after a year, he one day showed up and said, you know what? I'm finally ready to talk about other things, because you listened to me all this year and you never interrupted my story. I needed to do that with you. I needed to know that you can be there and hear me. Right? So we never know.
Well, I think that's a lovely way to think about it, which is that whatever you're feeling may not be what your patient's feeling. And so you're still on the journey together.
Yes.
And the journey will take you where it takes you.
Exactly.
Okay. So you've talked about that you only prescribe medication when you feel like it's appropriate. Can you talk about the role that you think that medication plays in mental health care? You've said sometimes you just have this intuition of when it might be the right time. And also a number of patients come to you already on medication. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing sometimes you take them off of medication. So maybe just talk about, and this is like a little bit of the role of Western medicine with other, other forms of therapy, whether it's talk therapy or other modalities that you utilize.
Right. So first of all, making a decision to use medicine always feels so complex to me, because it seems not so complex to so many others. The reason for the complexity is that, is this going to be numbing, or is this going to be a relief that's necessary on a more immediate level? Because even though there is a process and a healing and a time, sometimes people have such deep suffering at the present moment that they really need a hand. They really need a helper. They need to be almost taken out of the abyss. The manifestations of being in the abyss can be pretty serious. People stop working, they stop eating, they don't sleep at night, they can't function. That's very detrimental on so many levels to their sense of self-worth, to their survival, you name it. So when I see situations like that, I'm like, you know what? Maybe using a medicine can be something that can be of help on a more immediate basis. I often see people that they've been on a medicine for 20 years or 10 years, whatever, and then now they're maybe on 2 or 3 medicines. And when I ask them, so what is this medicine doing to you? Oh, they don't know. Well, I don't know. It used to help, I think, but I've been on this medicine and my doctors always refill that for me. And then you realize, wow, like maybe this medicine is not doing anything anymore, because our nervous system is pretty clever at adjusting and absorbing. I used to have a therapist who said that the grass makes its way through the cement. So eventually, much of our own way of processing our own lives and trauma does recur if the treatment is just medication based. So those are, in cases like that, I do try to urge people, let's see what happens if we very slowly peel off the layers and find your inherent nature again, because it's there anyhow, but let's see what happens. So for me, in the most ideal state, medications are used temporarily for certain amounts of time to allow this feeling of, okay, I can get out of this darkness and I need a helper, but now I'm a little bit out of the darkness and now I'm going to do a lot of that work in the relationship with the guidance.
How frequently will a patient come see you? I assume this varies widely as well. So is the most frequent once a week? And if somebody has felt like they're further along on their lifelong journey, they come once a month or once a year even as like a check-in?
Yeah, so there's no like one pattern. And even amongst people, things change all the time. There are people who come once a month and then something pretty big happens in their life and now they want to come once a week or twice a week. And then whatever event that's been going on starts to become more integrated, we should say. And then we can go down to a lesser of a frequency. Yeah.
And I've asked this question to another therapist, and I don't know that there's any correct answer, but how do you know that you would benefit from seeing a psychiatrist or a therapist? Is it that you're open to it? Is it like, I mean, we all have things in our lives to process.
Right.
So some of us, I guess, can process on our own more aptly. Some of us need a guide or a teacher, or I guess some of us have guides and teachers who are friends or, other non-professionals perhaps.
Right.
But I don't know if you have thoughts about that. Yeah.
Instinctively, I want to say that everybody should go to therapy. Life is very complicated.
That's what the therapist said, by the way.
Yeah. It's like the life unexamined versus the one where awareness becomes more embedded, more like we're the artists of our own lives. And how do we create that piece of art without questioning, without looking for meaning, without understanding that there is going to be so much pain and suffering, and how are we going to allow for that? Having said that, I think that we are also, as humans, very clever at finding the help in ways that are not conventionally labeled as therapy or psychiatry. And that's amazing. That's what we're here to do for each other.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, we were talking earlier about death and dying and how we don't talk about that. I think a very positive is that we do talk about mental health now. I mean, even when I was growing up, we didn't really talk about it. So in a pretty short span of time, I think we have much more openness to talking about it, that it's not a negative to be in therapy, or take medication or whatever it is, that we all are suffering this human condition, and that we will have different ways, none of them right or wrong, to make our way through it.
Yes.
So
I agree.
We do have some positives. We have some negatives. We still have some positives.
Awareness and allowing for the emotions to be taken with more regard.
Yeah.
I agree.
How do you have one or two suggestions for people on things that they can do in their daily lives? So not obviously in a therapist or psychiatrist's office, but things that they can just do daily to support their mental health.
Absolutely. Two big things that come to mind, and which I do myself as well, by the way. One is meditation. It's so incredible to take a few minutes to slow down, and the ritual of the meditation practice, I do believe it changes our neurochemistry, and I think there's been a lot of studies that have evidence of neuroplasticity. And so then the slowing down process in and of itself, given that it's so rare nowadays to be allowed to slow down, which is sort of the opposite of being in that fight flight, which so many of us are in all the time. And the other most incredible thing is to spend time in nature, to go outside, to be out there, to connect to a tree. It doesn't have to be far away in some big mountain. It can be in one's neighborhood.
Well, in this series that I just finished on neuroaesthetics, I spoke with Professor Chatterjee, who has done a lot of work. He's also a physician by training, but now spends all of his time on this idea of studying the brain in the built environment and neurology. And there's a lot of data that suggests that nature in our built environment makes us feel good. So we tend to seek it out. So whether it's windows and light coming into your house, plants inside of your house, or patterns in tiles or wallpaper or fabrics that we may unknowingly have chosen that replicate patterns we see in nature, like shells or other kinds of patterns. It's called biophilic design, and we bring it into our homes and it increases our well-being. So the fact that you say that nature, spending time in nature is healing is very in line with the research that he's done as well, which is so interesting to me. And the meditation, I also spoke with another physician who has started an online breathwork practice for people, and that even 5 minutes a day of breathwork, which is a type of meditation, can have all of these health benefits. So I think that there are more and more studies showing that too. I think people hear meditation and they think, I don't have 20 minutes or an hour, but it doesn't have to be. It can be as little as 5 minutes a day to see these benefits. And I think some people feel like they're not quote unquote good at meditation, but there's not one kind of meditation that is a good kind of meditation.
Right.
So I think it's about finding a practice that's good for you. It could be walking in nature for 5 minutes or longer if you have it. It could be sitting quietly with your eyes open or closed. The monk that we meditated with in Japan, the form of meditation that he subscribes to is you actually have your eyes opened. Your eyes are kind of like half open. So you're looking only at a relatively small window of the world. And whatever happens, like even while we were doing it, incense were burning, insects would go by, and there was this dry garden. So these beautiful large rocks with also small rocks, and that will never change over time. And then surrounded by trees, which do change over time. So you have this sort of juxtaposition, or even the sky, which is changing constantly. So the changing and the unchanging. But the sense that, find what works for you.
Yes.
Don't be tied to, I think another thing in wellness right now, we see these trends of you must do this. You must do this kind of meditation, or you must have this kind of nutrition practice, or whatever it is. To me, the two things I want people to get out of this series are that there's not one size fits all. We have to find what works for us. And that is a journey. We can't just adopt what worked for our best friend or neighbor. We have to find what works for us. And two, that we need patience. It's not a quick fix. We need patience in all things. And expecting that it will happen in a week or overnight is not helpful or realistic.
So you're talking about the value of the process. That's why 5 minutes a few times a week is so much more than an hour once a month, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I see with what happens with meditation is, I'm talking from my own experience, it's like coming back to the self. It's coming back to a place where you don't do anything and you're just being. And it might feel strange initially because we are so used to doing. But when you can say, okay, well, I'm just going to be for a few minutes and allow myself to get more familiar with that experience, it's like coming back to the original self, the authentic self, almost like how we were when we were babies.
And I think with my experience with this monk in Japan, I don't think it's realistic for me to achieve this sense that he has of never being troubled by anything. But in these 5 or 15 minutes that I'm meditating, I think I can achieve it in that very small period of time. And it's work even then to empty your mind and just be, and not be thinking about either what you need to do next or somebody you're worried about or what have you. But that practice of just emptying your mind and just being, I think if we can achieve this sense of not being troubled by something, even for 5 minutes, there's a benefit to that.
But I will tell you from my own experience, sometimes I sit down 5 minutes, I won't be troubled by anything, but all the troubles in the world are flooding. And that's okay as well.
I would love to hear your thoughts on sort of the state of the quote unquote wellness industry today, where I think so many people are seeking wellness, and perhaps it feels further from most people.
Right. So it's interesting that here we are talking about meditation as we're transitioning to this topic of wellness. I mean, what I notice that I see out there with wellness is there is bombardment. Okay, do this and don't do this and take those vitamins and make sure that you use this air filtrator. I think first and foremost, it's hard to keep up with all of it. And it's hard to know what information is one should access or implement in one's personal life and so forth. How do we make sense of it? I don't know what the answer is, right? There's a lot out there. That's why, for me personally, going back to the essence, the basics of where we came from, the slowing down, which is, we can forget that how healing that is, just as a way of being in nature. Hopefully it's accessible because we can live in New York City and have a little plant that you can connect with, right? Or go to Central Park or what have you. And I think from being with oneself or being in a more quiet place with oneself, there one's intuition becomes more accessible. And I think from that intuitive place, we can then start making decisions. Oh, I think I would like to navigate my nutrition in a certain way, or I think I'd like to walk instead of going to the gym, or whatever it is. But it comes from a much more like a connection to oneself that then becomes the guide to how to decipher this world of wellness and what do I choose? Because we can't do everything, right? I mean, that would become its own race.
And I think that many of us are in that race. So I think this sense of slowing down as maybe the biggest takeaway from the conversation is a really important one.
Yeah.
And one that we need to remind ourselves of with frequency. I don't know if that's what you would like the number one thing you would like for people to take away, but let me ask you if there is, maybe it's not the number one thing, but what would you like listeners to take away from this conversation? What would it be?
That's a great question. I would say I would like listeners to remember that healing is a lifelong process. And it's something that it's a huge privilege to be aware, oh, I'm here on this planet to heal myself, and then my healing self will also heal others, because I think we also emanate differently. We connect differently when we're more healed, and that there is no rush. There is no reason to run anywhere. It is the unfolding, right? The day to day. And then the other big one is the value of connection. Connecting to others, connecting to a great therapist, connecting to nature, connecting to that which is real. And in connection, there is a relationship. I mean, again, so many studies have already been done on the value of community. And we have such a breakdown of community nowadays, because if we're running, we can't stop and talk to somebody in the supermarket in line, or somebody that's walking across for us in the park. But there's so much healing that comes from connecting and connection.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And that's actually why I started my brand Amatan, which is French for to take care of your soul. And the whole focus of my company is on increasing human connection, because I felt like in COVID and even before COVID, we really lost a lot of that. And that a lot of times we think of connection as only good and happy times, but that we need to connect through all times. So grief and sadness and anxiety and joy and happiness too, but that this sense of community is important in all times.
Yes.
And we have to be open to it and vulnerable, make ourselves vulnerable to, I think, reap the rewards of that. I really couldn't agree more. I'm wondering if you ever sat down with your parents and imparted the learnings of your profession in this intergenerational trauma caused by the Holocaust. Is that something that you have done?
It's something that I do and I continue to do. It's not very formal, or shall I say, designed. It happens in a dialogue. Any dialogue can be about anything, and it would lead up to that, right? For example, I live in Los Angeles. We've had a lot of trauma with the fires, many people who lost their homes. My mom is very scared of losing her home now. She lives in a semi-unsafe mountainous area. This idea that my house is going to burn down. It's very extreme in her. This led up to a conversation about you didn't grow up feeling safe. And so, of course, this unsafety is, maybe it's there in everyone, but it's so intense in you, you know? So it comes up again and again, because the day-to-day life triggers thoughts and memories of that generational trauma. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about with respect to your practice in psychiatry before I ask you a few questions?
Well, one sort of thought that I had, which happened to me also in my recent travels. So I traveled with my daughter to Europe, and we usually spend a few days in England, and we did this time as well. And we went to visit Freud's house for the first time ever. This the house where he moved after, as a Holocaust beyond survival. I mean, he was saved by the Germans, somehow allowed him to escape and he escaped to England. And then in London, he had a house where he lived just for 1 year before he passed away. One thing I realized when I was there, as I was looking at his couch and the furniture and all these objects, he had all these beautiful artifacts, that what he really helped people do is find who they are, like their true selves. Coming back to the self, that's where the healing is. All the trauma and the generational, we take on all these layers that distance us from ourselves, from the uniqueness of who we are as individuals. And so somehow when I was in Freud's house, I had this awareness that healing is coming back to oneself.
Well, that's a beautiful place to leave that conversation. Thank you for sharing that. So as we explore in my brand, Amatand, objects, and speaking about Freud's beautiful objects, objects can hold a lot of meaning for us. They can tie us to the past, enable us to be more present, and even sometimes take us into the future. Can you share an object from your life, whether you still have it or not, that holds a lot of meaning for you, and tell us why?
I read that question. I thought, wow, this is a great question. I was looking around my house, and right away, my candles that I light on Fridays, and I have these, candle holders that are very ancient. I got them in an antique shop in Tel Aviv many, many years ago. And they go with me wherever I am. And then when I travel, I can't carry these big candlesticks. I have these tiny, tiny ones that I have in my suitcase. And I take them with me. And I think that it's not per se a religious practice for me, because I don't think of myself as a very religious person. But it's a ritual that connects me to the present moment and to the ancestors from where I came. And even though we talk about, the generational trauma, I still think the generational connection is something that is so part of who we are. And so when I do that, and I do that with my daughter as well, there is this connection to ritual. And I look forward to it. I know every week, no matter what happens, this ritual is going to recur.
I actually grew up in a relatively Jewish religious house, and we had Shabbat on Friday and Havdalah on Saturday. For people who don't know, Havdalah is the end of the Sabbath, and this is beautiful 3-wick candle that you put out to signify, it's the end of this time. And I have actually these wonderful memories of Havdalah even more than Shabbat, interestingly. So I love that tradition. I don't light candles now, and I also don't consider myself religious, but it's an interesting thought. I might start lighting them more for the connection with my ancestors than for religion. I love that. Can you share a favorite tradition with us? It could be something from when you were a child or something you do with your daughter today, anything in between.
So that I would say this is the one tradition that lasted through time. Everything else changes all the time.
Okay, amazing.
That's the one tradition that's remained.
And your daughter does it also?
She does it also. Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's beautiful.
Yes.
Are you in a phase in your life where you enjoy entertaining in your home? Why or why not?
I love entertaining in my home, and I do a lot of it. The reason for it is because of what we talked about in regards to community. I find that having people at my home is one of my favorite ways at creating community. In fact, I remember when my daughter went to college, I thought that the earth was dropping beneath me. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I it happened that it was women, that I created a women's community at the time where women came over and gathered to share food. There was no agenda, just share food and be with each other. And then it sort of took on a life of its own. I met some great girlfriends from that. So I know that when people come over and I can create that environment, and especially it's nurturing because there's also food. It seems to be one of the best rituals in life.
And that's why I ask this question. And my mom loved having people into our home when we were younger and would set a beautiful table and cook amazing food. And I think it's becoming a bit of a lost art because people are so worried about making it perfect. And it's really just about the human connection. Yes. So, as long as the food is edible, it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be a perfect, multi-course meal, and it can be potluck, and there are so many different ways to do it. And it's really just about spending the time together. Do you have one or two top resources, whether they're books, websites, or courses you can recommend? They could be about psychiatry. They don't need to be. It could just be, sometimes people just give us a favorite book.
Yeah,
we have a lot of
I
readers.
have so many. It was really hard to decide.
Yeah.
So I think one of my favorite teachers of all time, and I'm sure many other people, is Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth. And I think this is something that I haven't spoken about in too much depth here, but I love metaphor and I love myth, and I find myself using a lot of that in my work with people. I'm sometimes talking about something indirectly or through a fable. It's fascinating to me. So Joseph Campbell for sure. Another book that I'm reading right now for the third time or what is a book by James Hollis called Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life. And it's so good because, you know, finding meaning is something that, again, doesn't happen one time and that's it. We have our meaning, a recurrent cycle. We find our meaning and then it's gone and then we have to find it again.
Yeah.
Some other way. I love that cyclicality and almost like this rebirth that happens in the second half of life, which is where I'm at, I think, in my own life right now. Another really incredible teacher is Norman Fisher. He's a Zen monk. He wrote amazing books, Training in Compassion and The World Could Be Otherwise. Both so beautiful, such deep look into meditation, and it's like he's a guide. Yes. So but there's so many others, but those are the ones that came.
Those are wonderful. And nobody has actually suggested any of those. I read another book called From Strength to Strength by Albert Brooks or Arthur Brooks, which is about finding meaning in the second half of your life. Okay. But this one, the James Hollis book, I'm going to get that as well.
He's a Jungian analyst. Very, very interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. Last question, and you may have already answered it with the meditation, but what do you do for yourself? Do you have a practice, a focus, a habit, or daily routine that contributes to your success or your well-being?
My entire day is filled with routines. I'm such a believer in ritual and routines. It's also very grounding for me. So I wake up and after I take my shower, I meditate. I do it regardless of where I'm at in the world. It's something I used to not do when I traveled, and I noticed that something is missing. I thought, okay, I can take this extra 10 minutes and meditate, regardless if I'm here or who knows where else. Walking is a big part of my life. I love to walk in between client sessions. It sort of feels almost like a little cleanse, and then I'm ready for the next connection, the next relationship. I love going to farmers markets and finding those beautiful tomatoes. Something about it fills me with so much. It's like abundance almost. Those are big ones for me that seem to recur on a daily basis. Movement is really important to me. Stretching and dancing to music.
It's so interesting because I spoke to one guest who's a French sculptress, and her answer was, I have no routine. Like she hates routine. So for her, the solution is every day is different. And for you, the ritual and routine is what grounds you. And I think that's why I like to ask this question, because there are such varied responses. And I think it's important for people to, again, hear, like, there's not one right way. Yes. It's about finding the way that works for you. Yes. So thank you so much for sharing that, all about your amazing practice. It's really been a privilege talking with you, and I look forward to reading these books.
Thank you. It was a privilege speaking with you. I learned a lot from you about Japan and about your own approach. It's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to an episode of On the Table with Ashley. Subscribing to, rating, and reviewing our show helps us to continue to make quality episodes. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. On the Table with Ashley is presented by Amatond, an elevated, everyday, luxury home and tableware brand with products designed to cultivate connection. You can learn more about Amatond at amatendre.com or on Instagram at Amatond. By subscribing to our newsletter on the Amatond website, you'll receive updates on new episodes as well as promotions relating to Amatond and Amatond's products. Send us an email at reachoutanytime@amatond.com if you have ideas for guests or series ideas you'd like to pass along. Thanks for listening.